Welcome to F-18 Hornet. This training section will teach you the basics of getting the Hornet airborne. We'll cover the fundamentals of flight and aircraft control, including an orientation to the instrumentation. Sit back for a moment and enjoy this short demo while we familiarize you with some of F-18 Hornet's basic features. A training mission has been designed to go with each training topic. Select your topic, review the material, then click on the Hornet at the bottom of the training board. You may press pause at any time during flight with the P key. To return from your mission to the classroom, use Shift Escape. Choose a new topic or return to the main menu by selecting the flight book. At this point, you may start your engines and taxi to the duty runway. Once on the active, contact the tower for final clearance for takeoff. One last control check and steadily advancing the throttles steers the aircraft down the runway. As speed increases to nose wheel liftoff, pull smoothly back on the stick and the aircraft lifts skyward. Once airborne, practice the basics of climbing, descending, and maneuvering your aircraft. Check out the terrain with a multitude of views. You'll be learning how to handle a damaged aircraft with a review of some basic emergency procedures. This will wrap the first phase of your F-18 training syllabus. Listen through each topic, then hop in the cockpit and try it for yourself. Reviewing the training material is required. Good luck and good flying. You start your mission in the cockpit view. You may return to this view at any time by pressing the 1 key. Pressing the 2 key will select a look-down view of the cockpit instrument panel. The 3 view will always point toward your aircraft and can be rotated about the vertical axis with the arrow keys. The 4 key provides the situational awareness view. While in this view, pressing 4 again invokes the padlock view. The padlock view is a tactical view and will keep your aircraft in the foreground while locking your view of the last radar contact. The 5 key toggles radar contact view and will show you whatever is selected on radar. The 6 key invokes the tower view. The 7 key will track launched weapons, and the 8 key is a weapon eye view. Platform views are selected by invoking Shift 1 through Shift 6. All platform views provide an eye point mounted on the aircraft facing forward. They can be zoomed, however they cannot be panned or rotated. Look around by pressing and holding the arrow keys. The 45-degree up view is selected by the up arrow key. The left and right side views are selected by the left and right arrow keys. The rear view is selected with the arrow down. Use the up or down arrow key in combination with the left or right arrow key to modify your previous views. Zoom is available in all views except the cockpit look-down view. Shift plus zooms in and Shift minus is used for zooming out. Changing views will return your view to a normal magnification. The camera in and camera out keys, 9 and 0 respectively, may be used in most external views of the aircraft, missiles, and bombs. This point in your training marks the end of the basic overview. Each topic has a training mission developed to emphasize the material you covered in the subtopics. After viewing a subtopic or upon completion of a training topic, build your flight skills by flying the training mission. Select the Hornet at the bottom of the training board to begin the mission. Use Shift Escape to return to the classroom. Pause at any time by pressing P. Now let's get started doing what pilots love to do: fly. Start your engines by pressing the plus key. Both engines spool up to their idle RPM of 60%. Adjust engine RPM using the plus key to increase and the minus key to decrease. With the aircraft stopped, decreasing your engine RPM below 60% will shut the engines down and end your current mission. The delete key activates the afterburners. If engine RPM is below 100%, pressing delete will increase engine RPM to 100%. The next press will activate the Stage 1 afterburner. This is indicated by NOS position in the left DDI and more noticeably in the IFEI. Subsequent presses of the key will increase the afterburner stage to a maximum of 6. Remember, afterburner gives a tremendous increase in thrust at a cost of much greater fuel flow. You'll have only a few minutes of flight in afterburner stage 6. Shut down the afterburners by pressing either the plus or minus key. Go to look-down view by pressing the 2 key and check the remaining fuel in the integrated engine fuel monitor. Note your bingo fuel level. Bingo is the fuel required to return to base with a minimum reserve. A voice warning will alert you when fuel level reaches bingo. Time shows the amount of fuel remaining in minutes and seconds based on your current fuel flow. Normal taxi speed is approximately 15 knots. As you taxi, notice NWS in the lower right corner of the HUD. This indicates that nose wheel steering is engaged. Nose wheel steering high is active below 20 knots and allows you greater maneuverability at slower speeds. Nose wheel steering activates at 20 knots, aiding you in holding a straighter path as you reach takeoff speed. Attaining takeoff speed, nose wheel steering switches off. All friendly airfields will have fuel tanks with large white Fs painted on the tarmac next to them to signify the refueling and rearming area. To refuel, taxi onto the F and come to a complete stop. Press Shift S for service, replenishing all your stores and topping off your fuel tanks. Contact a ground control on the radio by pressing Shift G to get permission to taxi to the runway. Once cleared, taxi to the departure end of the runway called the hold short. Stop at the hold and call the tower by pressing Shift T. Once the tower clears you for takeoff, taxi onto the runway. Once cleared for takeoff, advance your power and start the roll down the runway. The flaps should be lowered for both takeoff and landing since they increase lift at low speeds. Lower flaps using the F key. The flap indicator lamp is located on the lower panel left of the IFEI. Release the wheel brake if the brake lamp is illuminated. Advance power to 100% and ignite the Stage 1 afterburner with the delete or backspace key. As your aircraft approaches about 130 knots, pull back on the stick. Once airborne, ease up on the back pressure as the velocity vector passes through 5 degrees to avoid climbing too steeply. Try to maintain the velocity vector even with the 10-degree pitch ladder line by adjusting your stick position. Use small, smooth control movements. Once safely away from the ground, raise the gear using the G key and the flaps with the F key. Your landing gear automatically retracts once speed exceeds 300 knots. Flaps raise automatically once your speed exceeds 250 knots. Note that they do not automatically extend for landings. Adjust your power level to maintain airspeed above 250 knots. As you approach 5,000 feet, start to apply some forward stick to level the nose. To maintain level flight, just use forward or back stick to maintain the velocity vector on the horizon line. Understanding basic emergency procedures is essential for dealing with aircraft damage such as a lost HUD, failed engine, or loss of hydraulics. Damage is displayed on the right DDI by pressing D. Loss of your HUD makes flying difficult. Take note of the position of the horizon on the HUD frame. As long as you keep a reasonable airspeed, holding the HUD horizon in about this position, you should maintain reasonably level flight. Check your standby instrument group for readouts on airspeed, altitude, and attitude of your aircraft. If damaged in battle, try to return to base. If the heading back to base is known, use the heading readout in the look-down nav display. If not, visually navigate back to base. In the event of engine failure, level the aircraft and increase thrust on the good engine. Try to maintain airspeed above 200 knots. Apply rudder as needed to counter yaw. You can jettison stores to reduce weight by selecting the store to be jettisoned using the J key. The Jettison Station Select display is located left of the integrated fuel engine indicator. Note that stores displayed on the wing pylons are selected and jettisoned in pairs to maintain the balance of the aircraft. Press Return or Enter to jettison the selected store. The jettisoned weapons are not armed and will not explode. Recovery from excessively slow flight or a stall is very difficult with a single engine. Landing is also difficult. Land fast for an extra margin of safety. Loss of hydraulics makes the flight controls very sluggish. Not a problem in level flight, but recovering from unusual attitudes is difficult. Level the aircraft as soon as possible, maintain less than 45 degrees bank angle, and less than 20 degrees nose high or nose low attitude. Land as soon as possible. Now that you are familiar with the aircraft, let's begin instruction on one of the most difficult tasks of flying any aircraft, landing. The training segments to follow will cover the procedures and techniques you need to get back on the ground. We'll go over HUD displays, instruments, and the crucial points of speed control and angle of attack. We'll cover the steps to get you into the groove, including setting up for a visual landing. Follow the training material, then give it a try in the training missions. All the skills you develop at this point will come into play in the next section, carrier operations. Perform a quick landing checklist as you begin your approach to the airstrip. Gear and flaps are down as confirmed by the indicator lights just left of the IFEI. Hook is up in this case since it's normally only required for carrier operations. The ILS is on, displayed in the HUD. As you get closer to the runway, the ILS needles will seem more sensitive. Try not to induce oscillations around the glide slope and lineup by chasing the needles. Once the runway is in sight and you feel confident of your ability to guide the aircraft to touchdown, take over visually. Keep the velocity vector point directly at the center of the landing area. Use small control movements to correct for any drift. Rudders may be used to yaw the nose, but remember to apply opposite stick to prevent rolling, especially in close. Continue to scan the angle of attack indexer and adjust the throttles to maintain on speed. Avoid over-controlling the aircraft if possible. The Hornet is designed for carrier landings and should not be flared for landing. Adding a little power just prior to touchdown will smooth the landing, but be careful not to add too much. As the aircraft touches down, push the stick to neutral or slightly forward to bring the nose wheel to the deck. Once the nose wheel is on the ground, reduce power to idle and apply the brakes. Once you have the aircraft slowed and under control, taxi off the runway at the nearest taxiway. Keep in mind your Hornet automatically ends the current mission after you land, come to a stop, and shut the engines down. If you don't want to end the current mission, keep the engines idling. Establish a heading on the downwind leg. Descend to 600 feet and reduce airspeed to gear speed. At gear speed, roughly 250 knots, drop the gear and flaps and contact the tower. Watch for the abeam position of the carrier or airstrip by looking out the left side with the left arrow key. A beam is when your aircraft's wing line is directly lined up with the approach end of the runway or carrier. Once abeam, count about 20 seconds continuing downwind. As soon as the tower clears you to turn to base or final, start your descent and turn to the base leg. Continue your turn, checking your position as the aircraft passes the 90, which is the point where your aircraft's nose is 90 degrees away from the final approach course. Make the corrections necessary to roll out on lineup, wings level, heading directly for the runway. You will not have much time in the groove to make corrections, so as you roll your wings level, make any corrections necessary to get the velocity vector pointed directly at the landing area. The velocity vector should be about 3 degrees down. If it's not, correct to get the velocity vector in the neighborhood. Maintain on-speed flight, correcting for lineup and glide slope deviations all the way to touchdown. An aircraft carrier provides a very small landing area and very little room for mistakes. A carrier landing is basically a controlled collision between your aircraft and the carrier deck. The proper execution of glide slope, lineup, and angle of attack procedures for a carrier landing are similar to the procedures used in airstrip landings. Despite the similarities, smooth and timely corrections become even more critical for carrier landings. As we progress through this section, you'll recognize terms and procedures from the airstrip landing training. The basics don't change, but now we expand on them to meet the special requirements for carrier operations. We'll go over the landing aids such as the Fresnel lens system and get you on deck in good form to catch a wire. Deck procedures will prepare you for another sortie so you can taxi to the catapult and get back into action. We will discuss the execution of patterns that place you in the proper landing configuration and go over how to deal with the emergencies that might arise in carrier landing situations. The approach to the ship, or boat, is much the same as an approach to an airfield. It is important to be on glide slope, lineup, and speed. Use the ILS to align yourself in the groove. Once in the groove, you'll utilize 2 additional landing aids, the Fresnel lens system, affectionately called the meatball or just ball, and the landing signal officer, or LSO, who's responsible for assisting the pilot in landing. We'll cover the meatball in more detail in the next topic. At 4 miles out, on a straight-in approach, slow to just 250 knots. Transition to landing configuration and perform your landing checklist. Radar altitude is displayed on the HUD. Gear and flaps are down, ILS is on, and most important, hook is deployed. The hook deployment is operated by pressing the H key. Once deployed, an indicator light located on the instrument panel just above the brake light indicator will come on. The aircraft will not be able to recover on board the boat without the tail hook in the down position. After you're in the landing configuration, call the tower with Shift T. Set throttles to somewhere around 70% RPM initially. Correct your aircraft using the ILS needles, as close as possible to an on and on state by the time you're 3/4 of a mile out. When you're able to make out the ship's landing area, center the velocity vector on the deck parallel with the green datum lights on the meatball. You may still need to correct for glide slope and lineup deviations, but once you are on, recenter the velocity vector and hold it there. Scan the ILS needles and your angle of attack, correcting as necessary. Look for the meatball on the left side of the ship parallel with the middle of the landing area. At 3/4 of a mile with the ball in sight, contact the LSO and call the ball by pressing Shift L. At 3/4 of a mile from the carrier, you are on final approach. Contact the LSO by pressing Shift L. The LSO rogers your call and assists in evaluating your aircraft position relative to lineup, glide slope, and angle of attack. If the deck is fouled with another aircraft, or if your arresting gear is not set, the LSO will give a wave off. If you receive a wave off, add power and take it around, as described in the carrier pattern section. Otherwise, continue your approach, scan the ball, and check lineup and angle of attack. If you see the ball start to get high, correct with a little forward stick and power off. As the ball settles back to glide slope, add power and recenter the velocity vector on the landing area. Make smooth, timely corrections all the way to touchdown. Fly the aircraft right onto the deck. Do not try to flare. Avoid chasing the ball once you're over the ramp. As you fly down onto the deck, keep scanning the meatball, lineup, and angle of attack. The ball will move rapidly. Try to avoid large corrections. Keep the velocity vector at 4 degrees down in the HUD and centered in the landing area. Once you are over the ramp, fly the aircraft to touchdown without chasing the ball. Apply slight forward stick as you touch down and keep the nose on deck, and punch in 100% power with the delete or backspace key, just in case you don't catch a wire. Leave the power at 100% until your airspeed drops rapidly, then reduce the power to slightly above idle. If your hook misses all the wires or you land long, you'll have to take off again and bring it around for another attempt. Missing the wires is called a bolter. Once you realize the aircraft is boltered, the most important factor is stopping your sink rate. Strong backstick can actually be detrimental. Instead, add power, hold on-speed angle of attack by slowly adding backstick, and let the aircraft fly away. As your speed increases, add more backstick, keeping the center AOA indexer ball lit. Once safely away from the water, reduce power and maneuver the aircraft into the carrier pattern, as described in the carrier pattern section. Once on the deck, you may end the mission by reducing power below 60%, or rearm and refuel by pressing Shift S. Raise the tail hook up to taxi. Apply and lock the brakes with the space bar, and press the H key to lift the hook. Release the brake and steer to the catapult. Add power as required, but keep it slow and under control at all times. Head for the bow catapult for launch. Position your aircraft over the near end of the left catapult and lock the brake using the space bar. If your position and alignment are correct, the L bar light will illuminate just below the brake light. This signifies that your launch bar is locked into the catapult shuttle and you can begin going through your checklist for takeoff. If the L bar light did not come on, release the brake and move slightly forward or to one side or the other and reapply the brake. When the L bar indicator lights, you are set for launch. Be prepared for launch because by the time you reach the end of the deck, the catapult will have you going about 150 knots. Let's go through the checklist. Brakes on, flaps down, hook up, stick centered, spool the engines to 100%. When ready to launch, go to full afterburner and release the brake. At the end of the catapult stroke, pull smoothly back on the stick to put the waterline mark at 8 degrees nose up. Turn off afterburners and raise the gear and flaps. Now fly the velocity vector, keeping a 10-degree climb until 300 to 350 knots is reached. Then increase your rate of climb to hold 300 plus knots. If you are entering the carrier pattern, you will only need to climb to 600 feet, and you can reduce to a pattern speed of 200 to 250 knots. You may encounter some emergency conditions that require special handling around the carrier. Most emergencies cannot be simulated during training. Skill and experience may be the only hope in getting a crippled aircraft safely aboard. One that can be simulated is a no-HUD carrier landing. Before you turn off the HUD, notice 3 to 4 degrees down is about even with the bottom of the angle of attack indexer. This is the position you want to keep the landing area in during the entire approach. Without a HUD or in any other emergency condition, you'll want to perform a straight-in approach. You can use the navigation display in the HSD to read out aircraft heading. We'll discuss HSD in greater detail in the next section. Since we cannot see details on the carrier itself yet, keep the carrier even with the bottom of the indexer and centered on the HUD. Reduce power until you're on speed. Drop the gear, flaps, and hook. Use small corrections keeping the carrier centered and slightly down on the HUD. Check your landing heading against the wake of the ship. If it's pointing down and slightly left, you're on the correct heading. Correct for lineup if required. As details of the carrier become visible, look for the ball. Once you have sight of the ball, call the ball and correct for glide slope deviations. Do not let the aircraft get too out of shape. Watch your angle of attack and remain on speed. Center the landing area in the HUD even with the bottom of the indexer and fly the aircraft to touchdown. With an instrumentation, flight control, hydraulic, or engine problem, you should attempt to divert to a secondary airfield. If one is not available or fuel does not permit, then you must attempt to either land at the carrier or if the aircraft is not controllable at landing speeds, execute a controlled ejection. If you must eject, establish yourself on an inbound heading to the ship. Descend to approximately 1,000 feet and fly over the ship. Once past the ship, press Shift E to eject from the aircraft. You should be in friendly territory, so it's very likely you'll be safely rescued. The Hornet is equipped with an inertial navigation system allowing the aircraft to track its position very accurately. The navigation system weighs heavily in the timely and successful completion of your missions. It provides the information needed for locating key fixed points called waypoints. Waypoints mark navigation points important to your mission and are stored in the mission computer. The navigation system also provides a moving map displaying aircraft and waypoint information overlaid on the terrain. The navigation system, coupled to the autopilot, lessens the need for constant control input by the pilot. The autopilot has several modes allowing you to choose the mode that best suits your needs at the time. Waypoints are a fixed point in space, such as a target location or an airfield. Displayed on the HUD in the lower right corner is your selected waypoint, preceded by the distance to it. Go to the cockpit look-down mode. The HSD displays your selected waypoint vertically down the right side. The waypoint for your home base is always 0. Locate the waypoint bearing pointer and its opposing pointer tail inside the compass rose. Press the N key to increase the scale if necessary. Aligned with the pointer and the tail lies the waypoint situation symbol. Cycle through the waypoints by using the W key. These 3 symbols always align. Select a waypoint and change your heading so that the waypoint bearing pointer rests just below the lubber line. You are now on the correct heading to the selected waypoint. Go back to the cockpit view. Within the heading tape, you'll see a small vertical bar called the waypoint steering cue. It should have moved to a position above the caret indicating a heading toward the selected waypoint. TACAN provides you with a relative bearing and distance to a TACAN station. We'll use TACAN as a navigation point to airfields. Cycle TACAN selections using the T key. The current TACAN selection replaces the waypoint readout in the HUD, giving you the distance to a TACAN followed by a 3-letter code. This code is known as the station identifier. TACAN selection is also provided in the up-front control. Looking down to the HSD, the TACAN bearing pointer and the opposing pointer tail are located just outside the compass rose. The TACAN situation symbol aligns with the pointers. Navigating to a TACAN is similar in procedure to navigating to waypoints. Selected waypoints and TACANs can be coupled to the autopilot. This and other autopilot modes are discussed in the next topic. Autopilot can be used for everything from basic navigation to pinpoint bombing runs. The autopilot features 5 modes of operation and is controlled using the up-front control located just below the HUD. The upfront control indicates autopilot is on, and 4 of 5 autopilot modes are displayed in the option fields along the right side of the display. Shift-A selects the autopilot mode. A colon will be displayed in front of the active mode. The A key then engages the autopilot. Basic autopilot is the default autopilot mode and is not listed in the option fields to the right of the upfront control. If no colon appears beside an option, basic autopilot is selected. Basic autopilot will level the wings if your aircraft is not rolled more than 5 degrees at the time of engagement. If your aircraft is rolled more than 5 degrees, the basic autopilot will maintain the current roll attitude that existed when it was engaged. The heading select option, or HSEL, will capture the current command heading or selected waypoint and fly the aircraft directly towards it. Barometric altitude hold, or BALT, will capture the current pressure altitude which existed at the time of engagement and hold the current heading. Radar altitude hold, or RALT, will capture the radar altitude that existed at the time of engagement and capture the current heading. Couple, or CPL, will navigate to the currently selected TACAN, or, if used in conjunction with the ILS in a valid localizer area, auto-land the aircraft. The autopilot state is indicated in the HUD in one of the right advisory slots. Again, autopilot mode is cycled with Shift-A and engaged with A. Basic autopilot is not listed as an option. Therefore, if the autopilot is on and no colon is seen in the upfront control option fields, you are in basic autopilot mode. The moving map displayed on the HSD allows you to see your aircraft's heading overlaid on a graphic representation of the terrain. It also provides a visual aid in locating airfield orientation in relation to your current heading. Go to the cockpit look-down view and engage the moving map with the M key. The navigation symbology is unchanged, but there are some changes in the way it operates. Scale the map with subsequent depressions of the M key. Current scale is located in the upper right corner of the display. Bearing, distance, and time to go to the selected waypoint are displayed in the upper right corner. Selected waypoint is shown vertically down the right side of the HSD. The map display is centered on your aircraft symbol. North is up, so like any map, the compass points are stationary. Your aircraft's heading is indicated by the rotating aircraft symbol and lever line. Hold your aircraft heading. Your aircraft symbol remains centered in the HSD and the map moves beneath you. The waypoint bearing pointer and its opposing tail indicate the direction of the selected waypoint. Adjust your heading so the aircraft symbol and lever line align towards the waypoint bearing pointer. This will put you on course to your selected waypoint. Follow the same procedure to navigate to a selected TACAN, lining up with the TACAN bearing pointer. When you begin a mission, note your heading from the base to the target. If your aircraft becomes damaged, you can fly the opposite or reciprocal heading back to friendly territory. The moving map will help you find your base, getting you close enough to fly in visually. The remainder of your training will introduce you to one of the most advanced and deadly weapon systems in the world. Features of the radar system allow you to focus on your main combat requirements: detect the target, steer the aircraft, and release, launch, or shoot. We'll cover the primary and secondary sensors and their associated displays. You'll train in air-to-ground attack techniques and tactics, finishing up with the principles of air-to-air combat and its associated weapons. The main sensor employed by the Hornet is the AN/APG-65 multimode radar. Radar information is displayed on the right DDI. The radar has 2 primary modes of operation, air-to-air and air-to-ground. When the radar is first activated with the R key, it will be in air-to-air mode. Radar performs a scan of a given size or volume of sky in front of the aircraft. Because it takes time to scan a volume of a given size, different modes of operation are available to help optimize the process for certain tactical situations. In addition to the size of a scan volume, the direction the entire volume points relative to the nose of your aircraft may also be changed. There are 2 scan volume orientations. The first is known as a stabilized scan volume. This volume is positioned relative to the horizon and will remain fixed on the horizon despite the aircraft's pitch. The other mode is called a destabilized scan volume and is relative to your aircraft's waterline. In other words, if you point your nose at the ground, this is where the center of the scan volume will point as well. You will use air-to-air radar in searching for other airborne targets. Air-to-air radar has 4 submodes as well as options for scan volume adjustment and auto-acquisition. The current submode selected is indicated in the upper left of the radar display on the right DDI. Regardless of the mode, radar is affected by terrain masking and other limitations. For example, if you and your target are on opposite sides of a mountain, your radars would be unable to locate each other until you've cleared the obstruction. Use the R key to turn the radar on and also to toggle between air-to-air and air-to-ground radar modes. Use the Q key to cycle through the available submodes. Each mode will initialize set to its maximum range. To change the range displayed, use Tab and Shift Tab. Although the window you are seeing the radar picture through may have an adjustable scale, the radar will always display everything it sees out to its maximum range. For example, if you're viewing an aircraft that's 5 miles away, but the radar scale is set to 80 miles, the aircraft will appear squashed up to the front of the display. Air-to-air submodes available are velocity search, range while search, track while scan, and single target track. Velocity search is the ideal choice for long-range search out to 80 nautical miles. Range while search is most useful for general-purpose long-range scanning with a high update rate. Track while scan provides more information on targets than range while search, but is limited to a smaller scanning area. Single target track, or STT, actually locks the radar dish onto a single target and tries to keep it there. This provides highly accurate and fast radar updates which are required to employ weapons such as an air-to-air cannon. As previously mentioned, air-to-air master mode is divided into several submodes. Submodes provide functionality designed for different tactical situations. Cycle through the available submodes with the Q key. Velocity search is used for long-range detection. Its detection algorithms rely on velocity, and the contact must be closing on your aircraft to be detected. Aircraft flying away or perpendicular to you will either not be detected or return a very small velocity. Detection ranges can be as far as 80 nautical miles, however the current range to the target cannot be determined. The scale for velocity search is 0 to 800 knots in range versus azimuth format. Contacts cannot be cycled in velocity search, since VS will drop into single target track upon designation of a contact. The most effective way to pick out a specific contact in VS is to use the TDC cursor. Move the TDC over the contact with the shifted arrow keys and designate the target with the / key. Range while search is a very versatile mode providing both long-range detection and limited aspect capability. Range while search can detect contacts out to 40 miles. Because of a wider scan volume than velocity search or track while scan, range while search has the ability to detect targets in a larger volume of air, including those at lower altitudes than your own aircraft. As with velocity search, contacts cannot be cycled in range while search, since range while search will drop into single target track upon designation of a contact. Use the TDC cursor to select and designate the contact. Track while scan has better close-in detection than either velocity search or range while search, as well as greater look-down capability. Look-down is the ability of the radar to scan below the aircraft's waterline. This advantage makes track while scan the mode of choice for employing weapons. Use track while scan to employ your weapons after taking in the big picture with velocity search or range while search. Because of the speed at which it must perform a complete scan, track while scan is limited by the volume of sky it can cover. It cannot keep tabs on as large an area as range while search because it must provide more timely and detailed information on each contact. The single target track, or STT mode, provides accurate tracking of a single target. Single target track can only be entered via one of the previous 3 modes. The radar no longer scans, but actually locks on or tracks a designated target. Once a contact has been selected in track while scan, press Q to activate the single target track lock. You can manually designate a target for single tracking from another mode by using the TDC cursor. A TDC designation can be performed by moving the TDC over the contact and pressing the / key. Single target track then displays the track target, velocity vector, range to target, missile range envelopes, and depending on the weapon currently selected, the allowable steering error circle and steering dot. Auto acquisition, or AACQ, is a modifier for all submodes. When in one of the radar submodes, activate AACQ by pressing Shift-Q. AACQ will automatically designate the closest contact to you, and depending on the mode, either lock it up in single target track, or in the case of track while scan, designate it as a launch and steering target. Air-to-ground radar modes are useful to find the target, navigate to it, and identify it for your attack run. Activate the radar using the R key. Pressing R again cycles to the air-to-ground radar mode. The Q key then cycles you through air-to-ground radar submodes. In the air-to-ground modes, the range and azimuth grid fans out from your aircraft's position at the bottom of the display. Your current mode is displayed in the upper left corner. Bearing is in the top middle, and weapon selection is to the top right. Your barometric altitude is in the right corner, and your true airspeed is in the lower left. The antenna elevation caret is on the left side of the display. Again, pressing Q cycles air-to-ground submodes. Map is basically a navigation mode displaying general outlines of large, geographically significant areas. It is very useful in tracking along coastlines or rivers. Map mode paints a picture of ground features. If your waypoints are not functioning, Map may provide the extra navigation needed to get back to home in one piece. In addition, Nav can plot spots on the ground which may be designated with the TDC and handed off to weapons. EXP-1 provides high-resolution air-to-ground mapping enabling detection of tactical targets and detailed mapping. GMT is very useful for finding and attacking moving vehicles. Similar to sea surface search, it displays contacts as synthetically generated rectangles. To pick out targets, this mode looks for anything with velocity on or near the ground. If the target stops moving, the radar contact will disappear. C, or SEA mode, targets are displayed as small blocks of raster video. The backslash key cycles targets. You may also use the TDC to designate targets. There is no identification of a selected target as in air-to-air modes. Use the Target View 5 key to visually identify the target. This mode is ideal for finding very small targets, however it's up to the pilot to select from among what can literally be dozens of small contacts. C is calibrated to find moving vessels at sea and filter out extraneous material such as waves. The Hornet's main purpose is to perform strike missions. To carry out these missions, the aircraft can carry a very large and diverse collection of ordnance. General purpose and laser-guided iron bombs, AGM-62 Walleye glide bombs, AGM-65E Mavericks, CBU-59B Rockeye cluster bombs, BLU-107B Durandal anti-runway bombs, HARM high-speed anti-radiation missiles, and even the B-57 tactical thermonuclear device are all part of the Hornet's inventory for air-to-ground missions. To deliver this collection of ordnance, you'll be learning tactics and techniques for strafing, bombing, and the standoff employment of the Walleye, Maverick, and HARM. Your technique will develop as you fly more missions. Take into account the construction of the characteristics of the target and the surrounding enemy defenses as you choose your method for attack. New HUD symbology is introduced in the topics to follow. Two of the new symbols are the pull-up Q and breakaway X. If any air-to-ground bombs or missiles are selected, the pull-up Q is displayed on the HUD. The distance between the pull-up Q and the velocity vector is your indicator for ground avoidance. If the two symbols intersect, the breakaway X is displayed on the HUD. At this point, immediately initiate at least a 4G pull-up and hold through to pull out to avoid the terrain. The ground comes up fast sometimes, so keep your head in the game. Complete the following sections and you'll have the knowledge to properly employ weapons from the Hornet in almost all situations. The key then will be practice, enabling you to execute the tactic and destroy the target. Attacking targets using your aircraft's cannon is called strafing. Use strafing against multiple soft targets such as jeeps, small tanks, and armored personnel carriers in a fairly benign threat environment. The run-in can be made at high or low altitude. Locate the target in the appropriate air-to-ground radar mode. Cycle through your air-to-ground weapons in the left DDI using the right bracket key. Select the gun. The HUD will display your selected weapon and the number of rounds remaining. With gun selected, the gun reticle also appears in the HUD. Use Control-A to display radar altitude. At about 5 miles from the target, the aircraft should be level at 3,000 feet and about 350 knots. Once the target is in sight, it will start to drop down on the HUD. Maintain level flight at 3,000 feet. Do not keep the nose on the target. If you do, you'll most likely come in too shallow. As the target disappears behind the nose, wait about 3 seconds, then push the nose over and reduce the throttles. The target should be about 15 degrees nose down at this point. Steady the velocity vector on the base of the target, allowing the gun reticle to settle on the target. As you pass 1,100 feet, squeeze the trigger, allowing the velocity vector and the gun reticle to drift up across the target. Release the trigger when passing 700 to 800 feet and pull back on the stick for approximately a 4G pull-up until the nose is 15 degrees nose high. At 3,000 feet, level out and proceed straight ahead and away from the target. There are a few pitfalls to strafing. Pulling up by 700 feet to ensure safe ground clearance is one of them. Scan your altitude and be off target on time. If you need another pass, take it. Avoiding AAA is another pitfall. Trying to strafe an area blanketed by AAA is basically suicide. Knock out the AAA batteries before strafing your target. We'll cover one of the best methods of dealing with AAA in the section on harm targeting. High altitude level bombing keeps your aircraft out of AAA, but also makes it vulnerable to SAMs and enemy aircraft. As your altitude increases, accuracy decreases, making this method generally more appropriate for large structures. Recommended altitudes are between 18,000 and 24,000 feet. This allows you plenty of room to bunt your nose over and designate the target. Fly toward the target at your chosen ingress altitude. Speed should be about 300 knots. Once you start to track the target visually, adjust your ingress heading to directly overfly the target. When you can clearly make out the target, it's time to designate. Shift right bracket activates CCIP auto or manual mode. Set it to auto mode. Push the nose over, positioning the reticle on the target, and press the trigger, return, or enter key. The target designator diamond will then appear on your aim point. Level your aircraft, keeping the velocity vector on the azimuth steering line, or ASL. Continue tracking ahead until the release cue moves down to the velocity vector and you hear the click of the bomb release. Dive bombing is used when level bombing will not provide the accuracy required or the target is too small to be seen at high altitude. For this example, we'll use a 30-degree dive, which should suit most situations. Ingress for the 30-degree dive is 10,000 feet at 300 knots. Use radar altitude to give proper terrain avoidance during the delivery. Use a waypoint or a map mode stabilized cue or even a radar lock on the target to give you distance to the target. Switch to manual CCIP mode. As you hit 3.5 miles to the target, you'll begin your dive. Roll the aircraft inverted and pull back until your velocity vector is 30 degrees nose down, then roll back upright, continuing 30 degrees nose down. Maneuver your aircraft to position the CCIP cross directly on the target. Release your weapons and smoothly pull back for a 3G pull-up. Try to go no lower than 2,500 feet. Remain aware of the pull-up cue while in your dive. If the breakaway X appears, immediately initiate a 4G pull-up to avoid the ground. The pop is designed to bring your Hornet in under the radar of SAMs and possibly other aircraft. In the target area, you climb and then dive to give a very accurate delivery and avoid AAA. This method is well suited for a high-threat environment, but once you drop your bombs, get back to the deck and egress expeditiously. The choice between the high pop and low pop depends on the ease of locating and designating your target. Ingress at 500 feet AGL. It is important to have a waypoint or radar contact on the target during your attack run, since you'll be popping up at a predetermined range without the target in sight. Speed should be about 400 knots. At 3.5 miles, execute a 4G pull-up to 45 degrees nose high. Hold 45 degrees nose high until you hit 10,000 feet AGL. At this point, roll inverted and execute a 4G pull-up until you're about 45 degrees nose down. Roll upright, designate your target, release weapons, and execute a 2 to 3G pull-up to clear the target. You'll use the high pop for targets having a heavy AAA coverage. Follow the same ingress procedure. At 3.5 miles, execute a 4G pull-up to 70 degrees nose high and apply at least stage 3 afterburner. At 20,000 feet, reverse your turn, reduce back to military power, and pull your nose to 70 degrees nose low. Roll upright and look at the target. The target should be designated no lower than 16,000 feet, and you should fly no lower than 10,000 feet. Designate the target, release, and execute a 2 to 3G pull-up to clear the AAA. There are two types of low-altitude deliveries depending on whether low-drag or high-drag ordnance is selected. High-drag ordnance is used for low-altitude deliveries since target-to-aircraft clearances can be dangerously low. A low-altitude run-in can present severe target acquisition problems. Don't linger or climb to find the target. Refuel and come back if you have to. Vertically significant structures such as dams or power plants are good targets for the low-altitude delivery. Execute a low-altitude high-drag delivery. Ingress low somewhere around 500 feet AGL. As you close on the target, increase speed to 500 knots. Speed is critical for frag avoidance. At 3 miles from the target, climb to about 1,000 feet AGL, level out, look for the target, and designate. Go no lower than 500 feet AGL before releasing. If you're using low-drag weapons for the low-altitude delivery, you'll need to generate more separation between your aircraft and the bombs. At 3 miles from the target, pull 15 degrees nose up and look for 2,000 feet AGL. At 2,000 feet, reverse your pull and head 5 to 10 degrees nose low, looking for the target. Roll upright and designate it. Hold 10 degrees nose down until you reach 1,000 feet or the bombs are off the aircraft. The loft bombing ingress is the same as the low-altitude run. Speed and early target lineup are key. Only vertically developed targets are viable for loft targeting since you must designate early and at low altitude. Ingress to about 3 miles from your target at 500 feet and 500 knots. Once you've designated the target, pull 30 degrees nose up and wait for the bomb release. Once the bombs release, either pull through the vertical to complete a half loop heading back out the way you came, or slice left or right, turning hard and heading down to the deck to egress the same way you came in. This method is good for targets that cannot be flown over. The loft is not as accurate as other methods and can result in fairly significant errors. Harm targeting mode does not actually use radar, but displays an image fed to it by the harm missile itself. This makes it completely passive. It intercepts ground-based radar signals and presents a display of radar-emitting sources. It's designed specifically to support the launch of HARM, or high-speed anti-radiation missile, against those sites detected. The contact must be ground-based, it must have a radar which is turned on, and it must not be masked by the terrain. HARM mode is used to detect and destroy enemy radar sites, including those associated with AAA and SAM. The HARM display will only function if a HARM missile is loaded on the aircraft. The HARM display is located in the left DDI. Select HARM mode with the U key. In the upper left corner of the HARM display is the station location of the currently selected HARM. The symbol located in the center of the azimuth and elevation grid is representative of the nose of your aircraft, meaning the display is not top-down but in bore sight, providing display in elevation versus azimuth rather than elevation versus range. As ground-based radar signals are received, they are displayed in the DDI according to the type of signal emitted. The symbology is identical to that of the radar warning receiver. An A represents AAA, S represents SAMs, etc. Select a target by cycling through the contacts with Control /. Once you receive an in-range cue, launch the HARM using your trigger, return, or enter key. Electro-optical weapons are guided to their target by TV image. You will use this image to find, designate, and launch your weapon. These weapons are classified as standoff since they can be targeted and launched from greater distances than bombs. The standoff weapons available in F-18 Hornet are the AGM-65E Maverick and the AGM-62 Walleye. Both weapons feature attack ranges in excess of 10 miles, depending on altitude. While these weapons take less pilot skill to employ, there is a lot of time spent head down in the cockpit targeting. The autopilot is therefore critical to the employment of both weapons. We'll cover these weapons as individual topics. The FLIR, or forward-looking infrared, is not a weapon, but an electro-optical device with handoff capability. The FLIR can be used to designate targets for weapons, including iron bombs. In the next few topics, we'll look at the specific electro-optical weapons along with the FLIR and how it can be used to designate remote targets for other weapons. The AGM-65E Maverick is a TV-guided standoff weapon with a range of approximately 12 miles. Engage autopilot and become familiar with using the electro-optical system. Press O to activate the electro-optical display in the left DDI and to cycle through available loaded electro-optical weapons. Your weapon select status is displayed in the upper left corner along with the station indicator. Centered in the display are the launch constraint circle and gimbal angle limits. These symbols are part of the Maverick video. Use Control in conjunction with the arrow keys to slew the seeker head until it is centered at the base of the target. Zoom in is required using Control plus or Control minus. Designate the target by pressing the Return or Enter key. The X will change to a solid square indicating you have a lock on your target. The HUD will display the TD diamond on your selected aim point. When in range for the Maverick, an in-range cue appears in the HUD. Release the weapon with the trigger, return, or enter key. Once fired, the Maverick needs no more attention and you can immediately leave the target area. The AGM-62 Walleye is essentially an unpowered version of the Maverick with a larger payload and, depending on the launch altitude, longer range. It is, however, slower and more susceptible to drift than the Maverick. Engage autopilot and, using the O key, cycle through EO weapons until the Walleye display is active on the left DDI. The video display for the Walleye differs somewhat from the Maverick. The display provides two sets of double horizontal and vertical raster lines which form a square gate at the center. Zoom is required using the Control plus or Control minus keys. The target gate is represented in the HUD by a stationary air-to-ground reticle. Maneuver your aircraft to position the reticle on the target. Press the trigger, return, or enter key to designate. The target gate will then snap to your aim point. If you have a good lock, the gate will gimbal to maintain the target in the display's center. After designation, the TD diamond will appear on the selected aim point or target in the HUD. An in-range cue appears in your HUD when within launch parameters. Release the weapon with the trigger, return, or enter key. Forward-looking infrared, or FLIR, was designed to allow the pilot to see at night or in bad weather. FLIR sees in the infrared range of the light spectrum. Cooler objects will appear darker than warm ones. The FLIR pod is available by pressing O and cycling to FLIR. As with all EO devices, FLIR is displayed on the left DDI. Again, autopilot will be helpful to you while you become familiar with the operation of the FLIR system. The center of your view is marked by the field of view reticle. To the left of your field of view reticle is the elevation readout providing you with the gimbal angle above or below the horizon. Negative values represent angles below the horizon. Barometric altitude is displayed in the lower right. Use Control with the arrow keys to slew the FLIR's optics to the target. Zoom is required using Control plus and Control minus. A pipper, helpful as a steering aid, is simultaneously displayed in the HUD and tracks in relation to the field of view reticle. Maneuver to position the center of the field of view reticle on the target. Designate the target using the trigger, return, or enter key. If you have a positive lock, a symbol similar to the TDC cursor will appear on your target in the FLIR display. Likewise, the target designator diamond is displayed in the HUD over the target. You may now hand off the designated target to CCIP weapons by simply selecting a bomb with the right bracket key. Auto-release symbology will be displayed in the HUD just as if you had pickled the target conventionally. The Radar Warning Receiver, or RWR, plays a critical part in your survival in the air-to-ground environment. You must constantly be aware of what's going on around you. If possible, interrogate contacts using IFF. If you do not receive positive IFF confirmation, take appropriate action using the HARM system. The air-to-air engagement is a highly fluid and difficult collection of tactics to master. It will probably represent the most difficult challenge in rounding out your Hornet training. Today's weapons almost guarantee that shots will be taken at long ranges. You may never even see your opponent. Early detection is critical. The radar is the primary target acquisition tool. If you are not familiar with the radar system, a review of the navigation and radar section will be of benefit to you. Select the radar contact and evaluate it using the IFF. If it's hostile, begin maneuvering for the engagement. The F-18 Hornet uses three basic weapons in air-to-air combat: the AIM-120 AMRAAM medium-range air-to-air missile and the AIM-9 Sidewinder short-range IR missile. Additionally, the Hornet uses the Vulcan 20mm cannon. We'll discuss air-to-air weapons, tactics, and countermeasures in topics to follow. Things happen fast during an engagement, but they're manageable. Know your aircraft, its systems, and abilities. The AIM-120 AMRAAM is an active, radar-guided, all-aspect, medium-range air-to-air missile with a maximum range of 90,000 feet. The AIM-120 has its own radar, allowing you to fire and forget. Select the AIM-120 using the left bracket key. Select a target using your air-to-air radar as discussed in navigation and radar. Several new symbols will be used in the HUD for air-to-air deployment. Most noticeable is the circle centered on your aircraft waterline. This is called the Normalized In-Range Display, or NIRD, and is available only when targets are selected with radar and the weapon is selected. It is part of the display system used to get you in the weapon's launch envelope. Part of this display is the minimum and maximum range indicators. Inside the NIRD is your relative range bar. As you close on the selected target, the range bar will move counterclockwise within the NIRD. Once it is between the RMIN and RMAX points, your target is within the range of the selected weapon. The Target Designator Box, or TD, indicates your radar's line of sight to the target. The steering dot visible in the HUD represents the lead angle steering and is used to compute the necessary lead. Maneuver to position the steering dot inside the NIRD. Receiving the shoot cue, pull the trigger and launch your weapon. The missile will track the target on its own. The missile may take up to 20 seconds to reach the target at a distant range. Use the 5 key for a view of the target or the 7 and 8 keys to check the progress of the missile itself. Once the missile impacts, check to see if the target is still on your radar. If so, look to shoot another missile. Switch to Sidewinders as range decreases. The AIM-9M Sidewinder is a short-range infrared missile which relies on heat signature to track its target. The AIM-9M variant is an all-aspect missile which can continue to track the target regardless of their heading. A rear hemisphere shot provides a superior heat signature to a frontal attack, increasing the AIM-9's ability to continue tracking. The radar in your aircraft acts to cue the missile prior to launch, with the IR seeker head taking over once the missile is away. Slaving the IR seeker head to the radar acts as a safety and provides precise targeting. For information concerning the radar, review the nav and radar section. If you have previously damaged an aircraft, it's possible that you've knocked the engine out and there isn't enough heat to lock onto. The indication of a good heat signature is a high-pitched tone emitted from the missile indicating it has found a source. In the event you have no radar, the AIM-9M can be fired bore sight, or straight ahead. Since it's guided by infrared signatures rather than radar, it may be able to lock onto a target directly in front of you after launch. Firing the Sidewinder bore sight can be extremely dangerous, however, since it cannot distinguish between friendly and enemy aircraft once it's in the air. The maximum range of the 9M is 5 to 7 nautical miles, depending on target aspect. The AIM-9M has a solid propellant rocket motor with a burn time of only a few seconds. It is extremely high acceleration at first, then relying on inertia to continue towards its target. The 20mm M61 Vulcan cannon is a very effective weapon capable of a tremendous amount of damage. However, it is only effective well within a mile. When you first select gun, the HUD will display the weapon type, the number of rounds remaining, and a statometric reticle. The statometric reticle is a reference circle with a pipper located at the center. The statometric reticle will only appear if there are no targets selected in radar. The diameter of the reference circle permits you to estimate the target range visually. If a target's wingspan fits within the circle, then you are within range to fire. When a target is selected on radar, the gun will go into director mode. The director reticle will appear in the HUD. Each tick mark of the reticle represents 1,000 feet. Just outside the reticle is the gun maximum range indicator. This will move as the relative aspect of your target changes. The reticle is generally in the vicinity of the aircraft's bore sight. The more stick you apply, the more it deflects. This is not because the bullets are moving, but because your aircraft is moving relative to the bullet's trajectory. The lower right of the reticle is the range rate. To the inside of the reticle is your in-range indicator. Tracking your target with the target designator box, maneuver to bring the box inside the reticle. When in range and the target designator box is in the pipper, you will receive a shoot cue. Hold the trigger for about half a second to a full second. The key is to be able to do it against a maneuvering opponent. To get a kill in with a head-on pass, you will have to line up the enemy carefully and maintain a steady hand. Start firing early at roughly a mile out and hold for the pass, 2 seconds maximum. Try to keep the reticle steady on the enemy aircraft for the entire shot. The reticle will have a tendency to jump. This is perfectly normal as the radar is updating its data. The potential for a head-on collision is high, so be ready to brake hard into the bandit and initiate a dogfight if you fail to kill through the head-on pass. The high angle off, or snapshot, basically occurs when a bandit flies across your windscreen. You have very little time to aim and you must shoot ahead of the bandit if you're to have any chance of hitting it whatsoever. Don't try to fly the bullets onto the target. Aim ahead and let the bandit fly through the projectile stream. There is no simple trick here, just a good eye and lots of practice. The Hornet has 3 systems to aid in avoiding missiles. The first is the Electronic Countermeasures, or ECM system. This system attempts to jam enemy aircraft radar, making it difficult for the enemy to lock onto your aircraft and launch missiles. The downside is that if enemy SAMs or aircraft have not already located you with radar, the ECM system can highlight your aircraft and give your position away. Standard procedure is to activate ECM system only after you are painted by enemy radar or if you are in a SEED type role. Countermeasures are a limited supply of expendables ejected from your aircraft to disrupt the guidance systems of heat-seeking and infrared-guided missiles. Chaff consists of hundreds of small strands of metal designed to confuse enemy radars and missiles. The amount of chaff on board is indicated on the left DDI and is released with the semicolon key. Chaff is effective only for a short period of time. Thus, when you deploy it, you should also turn the aircraft to complicate the missile's guidance solution. The idea is to have the missile off your wingtip, release a chaff bundle or two, and turn into the missile, forcing it to overshoot your aircraft by exceeding its turning radius. Flares are designed to confuse heat-seeking missiles by generating, for a very short time, a high-intensity heat source to divert the missile from your own engines. The single quote key is used to deploy one flare. Unless you know, based on an enemy aircraft type for example, whether a missile coming at you is a IR or radar-guided variant, you should release both chaff and flares at the same time when performing evasive maneuvers. Use countermeasures liberally as you maneuver. A successful guns defense involves preventing the opponent from getting you in his gun's envelope and, failing that, making yourself very difficult to hit once inside the envelope. There are 2 factors that define a gun's envelope: range and position. The easiest to deny is range. If you don't get close to your opponent, they won't be able to gun you. To deny position, you need to execute a hard brake turn. That is, a maximum G turn into your opponent. If the bandit is already in the envelope, continue your turn. Remember, the bandit is trying to pull lead on your aircraft to get a shot. By turning hard, you have just made it very difficult for them to do that. However, you've jumped into his plane of turn, allowing him to open fire if he can generate enough lead angle. If the bandit continues to track your aircraft and manages to pull lead on you, continuing your turn is fruitless. Roll your aircraft 90 degrees left or right and perform a maximum G pull. As the bandit follows, continue to slowly roll away and pull hard. Keeping sight of a bandit with a low angle off is almost impossible, so keep a hard pull on the aircraft using a nose-down attitude and pick up some airspeed. Continue to turn and look around until you can pick up the bandit visually and attempt to gain ground again. The key to missile avoidance is early detection. Once you get a threat warning, try to determine if it's from an aircraft or SAM site. Use your radar warning receiver in conjunction with harm mode. If the threat is unavoidable, beware of a launch warning. If you get a launch warning, you must immediately determine where the missile is coming from. If you can't locate it, you're as good as dead. Use the radar warning receiver and look for the inbound missile as you prepare for a last-ditch missile defense. Once you locate the missile, you have two options: run or evade. If you feel you're at the edge of the missile's envelope, turn to put the missile on your tail. Go into a shallow dive and punch in the afterburner. This is the fastest way to open distance. As the missile closes, watch it carefully. If it's still tracking at 4 miles, think about an evasive maneuver. At about 2 miles, deploy chaff and flare as you turn into and through the flight path of the missile. Once you start the maneuver, you're either turning to help the missile solve its tracking problem or turning to help yourself survive. Force and overshoot. Reevaluate and turn to force more overshoot if necessary. Continue dropping flare and chaff.